In this lesson, we'll be learning about phylum Platyhelminthes. Let's first look at some examples. This is an example of a platyhelminth. This is the background to all of our slides for this lesson. This lives in the ocean, so we call it a marine flatworm. This is an example of a platyhelminth, or a flatworm, that's their common name, that lives on land in the soil. This is an example of a flatworm that lives in freshwater. It's called Planaria, and it's probably the most popular example of a flatworm. These are blood flukes or liver flukes, depending on what type of species they are. You can see they're very flat. They look like blobs, but these are in phylum Platyhelminthes, and they are parasitic. And then this is a tapeworm, which is also a type of flatworm. It's also parasitic. So what is a platyhelminth? They are flatworms. Platy means flat and helminth means worm. So you'll hear me call these either flatworms, platyhelminth, or I'll call them phylum Platyhelminthes. This is the definition of a flatworm. Flatworms are soft, flattened worms that have tissues and internal organ systems. They are the simplest animals to have 3 embryonic germ layers, bilateral symmetry, and cephalization. So let's talk about what each of those things mean. First of all, they're a worm with a flattened shape. How is a worm's shape beneficial? A worm's long, slender body allows an animal to move about more rapidly than a radially symmetrical body. Worms can move forward in a single direction. They have a head, which we'll talk about in just a second, and that head can point them in a direction and they go there. The mouth, sense organs, and brain, if there is one, are located at the anterior or head of the body. So we have evolved a head. That's a new development in phylum Platyhelminthes that cnidarians did not have. So platyhelminthes also have this development of 3 embryonic germ layers. Cnidarians only had 2. They had an ectoderm and an endoderm. But platyhelminthes and all animals proceeding have 3 embryonic germ layers. And what this means is as the immature animal is forming, so an egg and sperm meet and the cells begin dividing. And then as those cells divide and divide, they create 3 layers or 3 embryonic germ layers, and each of those germ layers develops into certain organs. So the ectoderm, which is the red layer you can see in the pictures over here, the ectoderm germ layer forms the skin of organisms. The mesoderm is the middle layer, and that's the blue areas you can see on the picture. And mesoderm forms muscles and reproductive systems. And then the endoderm, endo means inner, so the endoderm is the innermost layer, and that's the yellow you can see in the picture, and the endoderm forms the digestive system. Platyhelminthes also have bilateral symmetry. And what does this mean? This means that there is only one place where you can cut the organism in half and have 2 of the same pieces. So you are bilaterally symmetrical. So phylum Porifera, sponges, they didn't have any symmetry at all. Cnidarians had radial symmetry, which means you could cut them in any way and they were the same. Now with bilateral symmetry, there's only one place you can cut the organism where the 2 halves will be the same. Cephalization is also a new development in platyhelminthes. It simply means a concentration of nerves in the head. Cephal, that root, means head. And so cephalization is a formation of the head, a concentration of nerves in the head. Eventually it will lead to a brain, but in flatworms it means there is a neural ganglion, which is a concentration of nerves in the anterior or head region. Flatworms are a coelomate. Now they have these 3 embryonic germ layers that form the different organ systems, and they are acoelomate, which means they don't have a body cavity. A means without, coelomate means body cavity, so flatworms do not have a body cavity. How does this compare with other organisms? So this is a planaria, a flatworm, and you can see here in the picture, so here's the digestive tract, and here's the ectoderm, or the skin, and inside there's just organs everywhere. There's no body cavity. The region between the gut and the body wall is packed with organs. Organisms that are pseudocoelomate, like roundworms, we'll talk about in the next unit, they have a body cavity. That's this space right here. So here's the digestive system, and here's the other organs. They have a body cavity. True coelomates have a body cavity. Here it is in this blue area right here, and it's lined by a peritoneum. So that means that here's the gut, here's other organs, and there's space between organs and the body wall. Now this space is filled with liquid or fat or other things, but there is a cavity. That the organs reside in. So platyhelminthes have developed several things that are different from cnidarians. Platyhelminthes have bilateral symmetry. They have tissues organized into organs and organ systems. They have a highly organized nervous system and cephalization, and they have a reproductive system. Their gastrovascular system is also more advanced. So let's compare and contrast cnidarians. Cnidarians have 2 layers, 2 embryonic germ layers. They do not have a head. They have radial symmetry, and they have tissue-level organization. Platyhelminthes, on the other hand, have 3 embryonic germ layers. They do have a head. They have cephalization. They are bilaterally symmetrical, and they have organ system level organization. Let's talk about feeding now. Free-living flatworms are carnivores, meaning they eat meat, or scavengers, meaning they feed on recently dead things. So free-living means they're independent from other organisms. And here's an example of a scavenger flatworm feeding on a recently dead earthworm. Flatworms have a gastrovascular cavity and a pharynx, which is used to pump food into the cavity. So there's an example of the pharynx. It's this tube that pumps the food into the gastrovascular cavity. Now, some flatworms are parasitic, meaning they infect a host. Parasitic flatworms feed on blood, tissue fluids, or pieces of cells within the host's body. Class Cystota has no digestive system. They live in their host digestive tract and absorb nutrients. So there's a picture of a flatworm, of a tapeworm. This is called the scolex, and these hooks hook into the digestive system of a host. It can be humans, pigs, cows, dogs. Lots of organisms have tapeworms or can have tapeworms. So it uses the scolex to hook onto the inside of the digestive tract, and then it lives there soaking up the host's nutrients as the host digests its own food. And there's another microscope picture of a tapeworm's scolex that it uses to hold on to its host. Now let's talk about respiration. Respiration is accomplished by diffusion in flatworms. It's because they're so thin. So they can rely on diffusion. They can rely on the water surrounding their bodies to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. So flatworms that live in the soil have to live in pretty moist soil because they do rely on the water to help transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. Circulation is also accomplished by diffusion in flatworms. They are so thin again, so they rely on the water surrounding their bodies to transport oxygen, nutrients, and carbon dioxide. For excretion, flatworms have developed flame cells. These flame cells filter and remove water and also ammonia and urea. Those are byproducts of cellular chemical reactions, and they need to exit the body so they don't poison the body's cells. So here's a picture of flame cells. They bring the body's fluids through them, and then they filter out the ammonia and urea and help it exit the body. So there's these little holes all over the flatworm's body where the waste exits. Now, response. Flatworms have a neural ganglion and nerve cords. This is how they gather information from their environment. They have eye spots to detect light and auricles, which detect smell and touch. So here's an example of a flatworm. Auricles are right here. They help detect touch. Eye spots will help detect light. And then here's the concentration of nerves in the head. This is the cephalization. And then the nerve cords running through the body. Flatworms glide using cilia, which are little finger-like projections all over their bodies, or they use muscle cells to twist and turn. So these muscle cells are pretty important in flatworms. They help the flatworms propel themselves forward, or they can also twist and turn. So here's a picture of the cilia that are on the flatworms' bodies, or they can use their muscle cells as well to move. Reproduction is accomplished in flatworms sexually. Most flatworms are hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodites mean that the organism is both male and female. It has male and female organs. So during sexual reproduction, two worms join in a pair, and then they both deliver sperm to each other. And then that sperm fertilizes their eggs, and then they have made flatworms. Reproduction can also happen asexually by fission in planaria. Here's a planaria. That's actually quite a useful lab organism, and you can do lots of things with them in the lab. And so this flatworm had its head cut in half, and it regenerated 2 heads. Flatworms have amazing stem cells that are able to grow into what type of cells they need. And in this case, they grew into head cells, so they have a complete head again. So that's the end of this lesson of phylum Platyhelminthes. And now you'll watch a video about flatworms to learn a little bit more.